So this first segment, we talked a little bit about different perspectives and why publicly oriented space is important in the city from an environmental, cultural, economic standpoint. And so now we're going to see how the design community thinks about it when they're actually making spaces and designing spaces and taking into account these variables. So we're fortunate we have two design firms that I will introduce in a minute to talk to us a little bit about West Hollywood. West Hollywood specific has some opportunities, I think, going forward. And, you know, I mentioned that the best designs are the ones that take into account all of these things. And just two quick examples I wanted to share. And we think about structures and whether they're permanent or temporary, seasonal or not. And I wanted to share this project that I think is pretty remarkable. It was done by an African architect in a garden in London. The Kensington Gardens has a program of inviting designers to do installations. And so Francis Kéré proposed this pavilion that was very much about a gathering space, as a pavilion typologically would be, but embedding sort of culture into it, bringing some of his roots into the design of the space. And so it was operating both on a social level and an environmental level with the shading, the detailing. You know, Sophie mentioned the importance of detailing here. This entire space gets shaded through almost like a basket making technique. But then, you know, you say economics, how does that play into this? Well, it turns out that this, as a pavilion, was a temporary space. It was meant to go away. But the reality is that it ended up getting purchased by a gallery, and they didn't disclose the amount, but previous ones have been in the 500,000 to 600,000 range. And so a gallery in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, purchased it, and they're going to reinstall it, and now something temporary has become permanent. So economic value, even in creating public space, is in so many different ways. And then in terms of spaces for all, spaces for people, this is a project that I've mentioned before that I think is so exceptional. It was educational center that had kind of become in a bit disarray. It was for vocational training in Singapore. And there was a renewed spirit to come in and really transform it. And a number of publicly oriented spaces were integrated into this campus, both through water and plants and a new ecology, but also in a gathering space. And this central gathering space on the left is actually an outdoor pavilion. Well, what do I call it? It's an amphitheater in effect. It's a sort of outdoor speaking space, but it's entirely designed through a universal lens for people of all needs, young and old, those who have physical disabilities, those who may have sight impairment, physical challenges. They design the benches high and low, narrow and wide. Ramps connect the whole thing. Lighting is integrated for wayfinding. Rails are provided for mobility. And yet it's still a beautifully designed space. And I think oftentimes designers don't embrace enough the opportunities, not just the challenges, but the opportunities in providing universal access and how that can really make better space. So I wanted to share this with you as well. But locally, if we move to West Hollywood, we don't have a formal public open space program, but we do have these quasi-public spaces that we already know and familiar with. So whether it's the West Hollywood Gateway, Plaza space, the new Sunset Spectacular, where there's a little public space that's been integrated through the billboard and signage program. This is actually, by the way, an example of what's to come. There's a pretty extensive billboard program that's being planned for Sunset, but one of the things that the council was very insistent upon is, as these new billboards go in, that there's also a public realm component that goes with them. And so we are going to be seeing along the Sunset Strip, and sort of the trail that Candace mentioned, the strip is sort of our trail up there. But there are going to be a number of new moments for the public that are going to be created that are educational, environmental, cultural, that are going to be implemented through the billboard program. So that's, hopefully coming soon, we'll be hearing more about that. Another space that you may be familiar with at the Sunset Millennium area, the Sunset Project at 8560, they have sort of a V-shaped open promenade, paseo type of space. The managing company, Kilroy Realty, has invested huge amounts of dollars into this space to make it a very effective and welcoming public space along the Sunset Strip. Another one that many of you may be familiar with is that elevated rooftop condition here at the Restoration Hardware. This one was originally entitled with a quasi-public space. It, from my understanding, is operating more as a courtesy. It's not an official public space, but it is nonetheless quite an urban oasis if you've ever been up on the rooftop. And it wouldn't take much to turn it into an actual parts, a publicly accessible roof and terrace type of installation. We have little intimate spaces too. Croft Plaza off of Melrose Place area is this little pocket space that is a rather nice retreat or sanctuary within the city, quite different in scale than, say, the West Hollywood Gateway, but nonetheless effective. Goes back to that sort of beads on a necklace I was talking about earlier. And then, this is an example of sort of a POP in a way. This is on Havenhurst. We actually have two pocket parks in the city, Formosa and Havenhurst. And this was a development agreement with a developer who gave away a certain portion of the private property to do a 99-year lease as a public space. Those of you who haven't been to the Havenhurst Pocket Park, it is a nice little retreat in the middle of the residential neighborhood just south of the Sunset Strip. And it's set up with two components that I think are quite interesting. One is that the majority of the plantings are edible. So it's an edible garden, and there's sort of educational component. There's signage that tells you a little bit about the different edibles. And then there's also an art component that works with sound, which we don't necessarily think about as one of the senses that are possible to accentuate in public space. But not only is there a fountain that has a steady trickle and sort of takes you out of the hustle and bustle of the city, but there's also an installation in the upper right where when you sit on a bench, the art triggers, and there's a sound component where a sound artist has done an installation. And that's another little moment that you don't necessarily find in the city. So these kinds of spaces open up so many doors that I think are very exciting for the future. And then the last one I wanted to mention is, been very much on people's minds lately, the community garden program that's in the city. It was originally set up to be rotating, which is great in theory when there are places to rotate to, but we are, again, a built-out city, and so we're going to have to think differently about community gardening going forward and where some of those opportunities might be. But just like the pocket park idea where there's sort of a set aside, we'll have to start thinking about ways to encourage that to happen. And they can happen on the roofs, by the way. There are community gardens on rooftops. So as I've mentioned, we start to think about community and profitability in a different way with public open space. And when all three, the sort of social components, the financial components, and the environmental components are working dynamically and together, we can really create a very healthy and vibrant community and city with the diversity of spaces. And so stewardship can take place in multiple ways, both on the policy side and on the implementation side. I know a lot of the work that we've been doing in the Urban Design and Architecture Studio has been trying to get more focus and attention on climate stewardship and how, if we're going to build, how we can build in the best possible way. And moving from the left side of this chart, which is sort of the conventional practices which have been done for decades, we do have certain regulations in place for green building and landscape standards. But in my experience with the city, the minimum required is the maximum provided. That's sort of the motto. And so, we have local green building programs that have started moving us towards the right side of this slide. Those are kind of points-based programs, but at least they're a way that we can start working with the development community to ensure that there are certain things that are being provided in new development. But ultimately, I think where we want to go is all the way to the right. That's the ultimate, where through new development, we're actually regenerating the city. And I think Catherine's talk was on point that we can heal, we can set up future to thrive through regenerative techniques and making sure that everything is working together at all levels, socially, economic, and ecological.